Hi everyone and welcome to a new video on the CBI channel. In this tutorial series we're implementing themes in our Django and React application by using components from Material UI. This is not the first video in this series, in fact we've already done 3 before, in which we've added a custom theme to our React.js frontend. I showed you how we can switch between a light and a dark theme using a switch component, and we even created a theme picker where we can switch between multiple themes using a select field. In this video we're going to continue and I'm going to show you how you can store your themes inside of your Django backend database so that you can store a theme and all of the details for each of the users inside of your application. And that's going to look something like this, where we have the ability to create multiple themes inside of the theme model and then set one of the active themes inside of the active themes model. And that means that we can create multiple themes inside of our database and pick one, and all of the details inside of our active theme we are going to pass to our frontend so that the database information is actually passed to the theme of the user. Now, to realize that, we will be following 7 main steps. First, we need to prepare our Django backend, where we're going to be adding some models in our database to actually store the information about our themes. Then we're going to be creating some themes in our database already, just so we have something populated there. And we're going to create a serializer, a view, and a URL to create an API to bring all of that information from the backend to the frontend. So we're using Django REST framework to realize that. Once we have made that API available to the front end, we need to do a lot of work on the front end to make sure that everything works over there. So we're going to start by installing Axios and creating a mechanism for getting the data from the API and using it in the front end. Then we're going to get all of our themes and passing them into the existing select form that we have already created in the previous video. And we're going to create some logic that allows us to select what the active theme should be. Then as a last step, we will make sure that the details of the active theme are passed into our theme in the front end. So this is what our application looks like at the moment, where in the settings page, we can pick between multiple different themes, and based on that, the layout will change. However, currently the information for these themes is all hard-coded inside of our Visual Studio Code. So in the front-end folder and then in source components and themes, we have set up multiple different themes with their configurations. Now what we want to do is actually store this information inside of our database, and later on in the next video, even allow users to create their own themes by adding colors and then setting their active theme. So what we want to do is create some models inside of our Django backend that can store these type of information so that we have it stored in our database instead of these files in our front end. So to realize that, we're going to go to our backend folder of our Django application, and then we're going to go to the app folder and to the models.py file. Now in here, we can define the tables that we want to see inside of our database. Now I want to create 2 tables, and the first table is going to be called themes. So we do class, and then we say themes, and then we do models.model. Now in this table, I want to store all of the themes that users have created. So what I want here is, first of all, a name of each of the themes. So we can set that to models.garfield, and then say that the max length of the name can be equal to 200 characters. Now, next to the name that we have right here, I also want to store some information about that theme. And we've already saw in our front end right here that we have settings at the moment defined for whether it's a light or a dark mode. We also have set colors for primary and secondary. So those are the fields that I want to add now in my database so that we can store that information right there. So the first thing what I want to do is have something called mode. And in there, we can just copy this over because I'm going to make that a character field here as well. Then I also want to store something called primary underscore color. And let's also have the same rule there where it's a character field. And then we're going to copy this over again, and we can have something called the secondary color, like this. Now, I'm also always adding things to my models, like a created and a modified date, so we know exactly when stuff has been created. So I do models.datetime field, and I'm going to set that to auto underscore now underscore add, and that's going to be equal to true. So whenever we create a new instance, it's going to automatically add the date and the time of when it was created. Now we can do the same thing for modified, but now we are going to set it not to auto now underscore add, but auto now is true. And that will update every time this model has been modified. Now the last thing we need to specify is what things are going to be called inside of our Django admin, so what we're going to see there on the screen. So we can do def underscore underscore str underscore underscore, and then we put in self. And then we say that we want to return self.name. And later on, when we want to view all of our themes inside of the Django admin portal, it will list them down based on the name because we put in self.name. If we did self.primary color, you would see the primary color appear there. But this makes more sense. So now we have a model that can store all of our themes. But I also want to create a model that only stores the active theme. Because that's going to be the theme that's actually being activated by the user. So I'm doing class, and I'm going to be calling that active theme. And in here, again, we do models.model. Now, this model is going to be very basic. What I want this model to contain is just the theme that we have selected. So we can do a models.foreign key and state that we want to have one of the themes being mentioned as the active theme. So we're referring to this table right here. And then we also need to set on underscore delete. And we set that to models.cascade. And that means if a model in here is being deleted, it's also being deleted from the active theme. Now I also want to add this created and this modified date just to make sure. And the way that this will work in practice is that when the user creates different themes, they're all stored in here, but we only want one theme to be the active theme in there. Because if you have multiple themes that are true, our frontend will not know what to use. So we can simply set the active theme by only having a reference to theme in there, and then we can get all of the details from here through this link to the theme table. Now we also need to add this def underscore str. So we can set that to self.theme because we don't have a name field in there. Okay, so we now have our tables defined, but we need to migrate these tables to make sure it's affected inside of our database. So what we can do in our backend is we can do python manage.py make migrations. And then we can do python manage.py and do migrate. And now these changes have been made inside of our database. Now I already want to add some themes inside of this table. And I want to view that inside of our Django admin port. But to do that, we need to do two small things. We need to go to the admin.py and register our models. So on the top here, we say from.models import all. And then we can register them individually by doing admin.site.register. And in there, we say that we want to have the themes model available in our admin site, but also the active theme. And let's save that. And now we want to log into our admin portal, but the only way we can do that is by having a user created. So what I will do is I'm just going to create a super user quickly. So I do python manage.py. And then I'm going to create a super user for my application. And I'm just going to set the username to user1 and user@user.com. And the password testing321 and then testing321. Okay, and now we can start our backend server doing python manage.py run server. And now we should be able to log into our admin portal with this user, just so we can see these themes and already create some. So we are now here inside of our front end and Django is running successfully. And if we do /admin, it goes to a login page. And in there we can say user1 testing321, and that should bring us in. Now in here we can see our two models. So we have themes and our active themes. So let's start by creating a few themes in here, which mirror what we have inside of our database at the moment. So inside of our database, we have a few themes. The first one is the dark theme. So we're going to be adding a theme. I'm going to give it the same name, so dark theme. The mode that we have defined here is dark, so we put that at dark. And then we have a primary color and also a secondary color. So we're just going to put in those color codes. And then we do save and add another. Then we have the green theme. So let's put it in like that. This one has the mode of light. The primary color is this color code, and then the secondary color is this one. And then we can save and add another, and let's do the light theme in there. And the mode is going to be light. And the main color is this one, and then the secondary color is this. And let's save that. And now we have these themes stored inside of our database. So what I now want to do is I want to make sure that we can actually bring these themes from our database to our frontend. And we can do that by creating an API using the logic from Django REST framework. Now inside of my project, I've already installed Django REST framework and also listed it down inside of my settings, same as the course headers. So make sure that you have completed this install and also added it to your settings.py file, because I'm going to be using components from there so we can bring the data from our backend to our frontend. Now, as explained, we need to create three main things for bringing data from our backend to our frontend, and that is a serializer, a view, and also a URL. And we're going to be starting by creating the serializers. So let's go to our backend and then to the folder of app. And in there, I'm going to create a new file called serializers.py. Now in here, I want to create the serializer for the themes and also for the active theme so that I can bring both of those to our frontend. So on the top, I'm going to start with an import and do from rest underscore framework. And we're going to be importing the serializers. And also we're going to do from dot models and then import all. Now the first serializer we need to create is for themes. So we do class and then we say themes serializer, and we put it as a serializers.model serializer. Now inside of a serializer we need to specify some things inside of the class meta, so some information about this particular serializer. First of all, we need to say what model do we want to serialize, and that is going to be the themes model. And separate to that, we also need to specify what fields we expect to take from backend to frontend, or which fields we in general think are going to be affected. Now in this case, I want an ID field, because we always want to include that, and then just the fields that we have listed down. So I'm going to say the mode field, the primary underscore color field, and then also the secondary underscore color field, because those are all of the fields that we have defined right here. And one that I've actually forgot, I also want to have the name, so we can display that as well. Now I also want to bring in my active theme. So we do class and then active theme serializer. And this is going to be very similar here. So we do serializers.model serializer. Now in here, the class meta is going to be slightly different. So we do the model, which is going to be active theme. But for the fields, we actually want to bring some more things to this serializer. Because what I just mentioned is we only have the theme in here, but we actually also want to get all of the details from this model for the theme that is active. So I actually want to have the fields from here, but also the ones from here for the one that is actually active. Now we can do that quite easily because we can say on top of the meta that we do theme details. And then we can specify that we want to refer to the themes serializer. And then we say that the source is equal to theme. And the reason that I put in theme is that the theme field is what links these two things together. And then we can say also that read underscore only is equal to true. Now in the field section, we are then going to say that we want to have the ID of the active theme. We also want to get the theme itself, which is going to be an ID. And then we can say that we also want to take all of the theme details to our frontend, which is this part right here. And later on, you will see that we will get a nested structure in which all of the fields from the theme serializer will hang underneath the theme details. So it will get all of the data from both models. So we have all of the stuff we need for the active theme. And let's save that. Next up, we need to add a view. And in the view, we're going to define exactly what we want to do with the data. And so we're going to go to the views.py file. And in here, we start with some imports. Now, for the views, I'm going to use Django viewsets because it makes it very easy to use one class to list down all of the data, but also to create records, to edit records, and to delete records. So we can all do that in one class. So that's always what I prefer to use. So the first thing we want to import is from REST underscore framework. And then we're going to import the view sets and then permissions. And we do from dot serializers, and we're going to be importing all, which is the serializer we have just created. And then we do from REST underscore framework dot response. We're going to be importing response. And we also do from dot models import all. Now we can create the view sets. So I'm going to create a view set for themes. And we're going to be calling that the themes view set. And in there we specify view sets dot view set with the capitals like this. Now in there we need to specify a few things. First of all, the permission underscore classes. And that is going to be equal to permissions dot allow any. Because in my case, I'm just going to allow anyone to enter or make changes to my app. If you have a login functionality, you might want to set this to something different. Then we can also define a query set, and that is the model that this view set is going to be about. And that is the themes.objects.all. And as a last step, we can define the serializer underscore class. And that is going to be equal to the themes serializer. And that is the serializer we have just created right here. So that one. Now, underneath this class of the themes view set, we can define different functions for creating records, editing records, and listing them down. And these are all quite standard. So I'm going to do a def of list, and then put in self and request. And this function is going to list down all of the records we have inside of our themes query set. So in here, we again define the query set, and we're going to set that to themes.objects.all. And then we can do the serializer, and that is going to be equal to self.serializer underscore class. And in there, we need to pass in the query set and say that many is true. Now, this just refers to this serializer we've already put in there. Now, as a final step, we need to return something to our front end, hopefully in the end. So we say return a response, and that response is going to be serializer.data. And let's type it right like this. And this should make sure that we have all of the data from our themes model and put it in an API. Now we can just copy this over and do the exact same thing for our active theme viewset. We're just going to name it differently. So we say active theme viewset. The model is going to be active theme.objects.all, and the serializer is going to be the active themes serializer. And then we also need to make sure that the active theme is happening right there. So let's save this. Now the last component from our API that we're currently missing is a URL. So we're going to go to our urls.py, and in there we're going to use router from REST framework to automatically create URLs for these functions that we have defined right here. So inside of the URL patterns, we are going to do from REST underscore framework dot routers, and we're going to be importing the default router. And then we can say that we want to set router equal to the default router. And we can do router.register, And now we can register the individual views that we have. So one gets the URL of themes, and we can say that we want this to create URLs for all of the functions inside of our themes view set. And let's also do a from.views import all, because otherwise we will not see the different views. So the themes view set, and we can give it a base name which is equal to themes. Now what this will do, it will create a URL automatically for all of the functions that we have listed down here. Now in this case we only have list, but if we would add another one for create or for edit or for delete, we can just define one statement right here and it will create URLs automatically for all of them. So that's quite beneficial. Then we can copy this over and do the same thing, but then for our active theme. And that is then also going to be our active theme view set. And the base name can be active theme as well. Then to make sure that it's all following the URL patterns, we need to do URL patterns. And we're going to set that equal to router.url. So this is the same way that you're used to inside of the URLs we have right here, so the URL patterns, but we're just saying in this case that these two things are now inside of our URL patterns. And let's save this. And actually it needs to be router.urls with an S. So now when we go to our backend URL, we should be able to see the new APIs that we've created, and it should list down all of the rows that we currently have inside of our database. And we are now inside of the API of our backend, and you can indeed see that we have a separate link for the themes and for the active theme. Now when I click the themes, you can see that it actually displays all of the data from our database at the moment. So this is actually working just fine. So now let's actually make sure that we have this data also available inside of our front end, because then we can start using it. We're going to go to our code again, and we need to bring this data from our backend to the front end. And that means that we need to fetch the data based on the links that we have defined in the urls.py file right here. So we're going to go to the front end folder right now, and we need to create a mechanism that can get the data from the backend to our front end. So first we need to start that with an install, because we're going to be using a package called Axios to make a request to those APIs. So we're going to go to our front end server, and I'm going to stop that for a minute, and we're going to do npm install and then Axios, and it is now successfully installed. Then we're going to be creating a separate file that is going to do the majority of the work for getting the data. So inside of our components folder, I'm adding a file, and I'm going to call that axios.jsx. And in there, we are going to create the mechanism that can get data from our backend. So we start with importing Axios from Axios, and then we can first put in the base URL, so a constant called base URL, which is going to refer to where we actually need to get the data from. Now if we go to the place where we just saw the data, you can see that the base of this URL is the localhost 8000, like this. So I can copy that over and put that as the base of the URL that we need to look for. And then the extensions later on is what we can add when we actually make the request. So in this case, that is going to be themes. Then we can define a constant called Axios instance. And this is going to make the calls to our backend to make those requests. So we do axios.create and then some round brackets and some curly brackets. Now we need to provide some information to make a request to our backend. Now the first thing is actually a base URL, a URL in capitals. And that is going to be equal to the URL we've just created in this constant. So we can do it like this. Then we want to set a slight timeout so the request doesn't go too fast. And we set that to 5000. And we also need to provide some headers to get some more information on what kind of request we are making. So we put that in between these curly brackets. And we first of all set the content type, both with capitals. And that is going to be equal to application/JSON. And then we also need to set accept And that is actually going to be the same value as this. So it's again going to be application/JSON. And this is all that we need to define to make a request. But to use it in other places, we need to do an export default of the Axios instance. So now we can use it in other files. So let's save it. So let's go to our app.jsx file now and make some requests to get all of our themes and active themes inside of our app.jsx file. Now to do that, we need some additional imports at the top. Now the mechanism we will be using to make the requests is the Axios instance we've just created. So we're going to import the Axios instance. And next to use state, I also want to have use effect from React. Otherwise, we cannot make those requests. Now let's start in the top by defining some constants where we can store the information that we want to fetch from our database. So first off, we have the constant where we're going to be storing all of our themes. So I'm going to be calling that themes and then set themes. And that is going to be equal to use state. And by default, it's going to be empty. Now we want to do the same thing, but then for our active themes. So we do active, let's call it active theme because it can only be one. And then also set active theme. And we again do use state and set that to nothing. Now what we want to do is we want to use the Axios instance to get the data for themes and then populate it in this constant using set themes. And the same for the active theme right here. So we can say that we have a constant and we're calling that get data. And that is going to be equal to some round brackets like this. And then an arrow function with some squirrely brackets. In here, we can then say Axios instance. And we want to get data, so we do dot get. And then in the round brackets, we can define what the URL is where we want to get the data from. Now we have already defined the base URL right here. So all we need to provide to make this work is the additional thing after the local host. So in this case, that is themes for all of our themes. For some reason, we need to do some backwards commas like this. And then we can do themes and end it with a trailing slash. So now we are getting this theme data. Then we do a dot then, because we need to do something with the data that we receive. And we do some round brackets and then again some round brackets. And in the middle, I do res and then an arrow function with some square brackets. And then we can say that we want to put this data or themes inside of the themes constant using set themes. So we can put in set themes and then say res.data. And this is going to put the data in themes using set themes. Now we can do the exact same logic, but now say that we want to do it from our active theme. And if we go to our backend and go a little bit back, you can see that that should be located in the active theme. Well, at the moment we don't have anything, but let's just make it for sure. So we put in active theme, but then we're going to pass it into the set active theme, so it ends up there. So now this is complete and we're getting the data, but we still need to tell our application when it needs to trigger this constant. Because we've just defined something, but we are not actually triggering it. So we can use effect to trigger it whenever we want. So we do use effect, and then we need to do 2 times the round brackets. And then after the blue ones, we do an arrow function and some squirrely brackets. Now in here, we mentioned that we want to do get data because that is our constant that we want to trigger. This thing is what we want to do. And then after this squarely bracket right here, we do a comma and then some square brackets. And that means that we only want to trigger the get data when we first get on a page. So let's save this. And I actually want to check out the result. So I'm just going to do a console.log and I want to say that something called themes, there we want to display the themes, so referring to this. And I also want to see what we get for the active themes, even though I know that it's going to be nothing. So let's also console log that. And actually we don't have our server on, so let's do that. So in the frontend terminal we do npm run dev. Otherwise, it will be very hard to see the data. And now let's refresh this page. And indeed, you can see that we now see themes and we see active themes. So we have the themes listed down here, our dark theme, our green theme, and our light theme. And also we have the active themes, which is nothing because we don't have any active themes. So fetching the themes goes fine. Now the next thing we want to do in our front end is in the settings page, I want to make sure that all of the themes that we have are going to be appearing right here, so that the user can pick the themes based on the options inside of our database. Then the next step should be that we can click on a button and we can then change the active theme inside of our database based on the different options that we have. So let's get started with making sure that we have all of the options appearing right here. And then we can figure out how we can set an active theme inside of our database and then apply that later on. So inside of our app.jsx file, you can see that we now have the constant of options, which refers to a name and a value. But if we take a look at our data, the things are called a little bit different because our active theme actually expects the ID of a theme as the value. So we need to change it a little bit. So if we go and inspect again, and we then go to our console and we go to our themes, we actually want the name of the theme to be visible inside of the pick theme select field. And we want the ID of the theme to be passed in as the value, because our database expects us to provide an ID of a theme that we want to make active. So let's make that small change right now. So the constant of the options can actually go away because we don't have the options like that. And actually we want the themes to be the options. So we can say in the parameters of our settings that options is not going to be equal to options, but to our themes. However, when we now go to our settings.jsx file, you can see that for the value, it is looking at option.value, and for the name, it's looking like option.name. So we now need to change option.value to option.id because we don't have a column called value inside of our database data. So let's save this and now see if the options are reflected correctly in our form. So let's save the change in the app.jsx file and see what our front end looks like. So now you can see that the select form shows the dark theme, the green theme, and the light theme, just the way that they are displayed inside of our database. So this seems to be working fine. Now the tricky thing is, right now we don't have any active theme set inside of our model. So I wanted to continue to use the theme that we've defined inside of our front end, like hard-coded, because we don't have any options selected at the moment. However, when we do decide to pick a theme and bring that to our database, I wanted to start using the theme from the database. So let's make sure that that logic is correctly implemented. So for the time being, I'm just going to set the light theme that we have defined before as the theme inside of our project. Because the first thing what I want to achieve is that we can pick a theme right here and that we can then have a submit button which brings the theme to our database. So the first thing we need to do to realize that is make sure that our backend actually allows us to create things inside of the view set. So what we can do is we can go to our active theme view set because we want to create an active theme. So we're going to go to our views.py file, and next to the function for listing things down, we can also do a function for create. And this will also take in self and request. Now this again is just a standard function from the view set, and it's really easy to enable us to create things. So we can say serializer is equal again to self.serializer class, and we say that the data that we want to serialize is the data received from our frontend. So we say request.data, because a request is being made and that contains some data. Then we simply do the check and say if serializer that is underscore valid. So we're checking if the data we are submitting and the serialization is actually going well. Then we want to do serializer.save. So we're going to save the data and we're going to then return a response to our front end, which is going to confirm that everything went well. by showing it the serializer.data, so what actually has been submitted. Now, of course, it can happen that we made a mistake and our serializer is not valid, and in that case, we're going to be returning a response, which is equal to serializer.errors, and we're going to put back a status equal of 400, which is a bad request. So that will tell us that something has not gone correctly. As I just mentioned, we actually only need to change our view because it will automatically create a new URL for creating this item. So if we go to our backend and we go one back, you will see that if we now go to the active theme, it shows us the option of actually creating a record. Because right here, it shows us different themes that we can pick from, and we can then just post it, because this now enables us to post. And this shows you that it's now open for requests. Now, what it wants to receive is an ID of one of the theme fields. Because we've made it a foreign key, so we link them together by specifying the ID. So what it expects us is to provide either the value of 1, 2, or 3 to our URL of active theme, and that will create the record. So inside of our front-end code, we can now apply some logic so that we can submit this data. So we're going to go to our settings.jsx file, and in there, we're going to be starting by creating a constant of submission, because we want to submit some data. And that is going to be equal to some round brackets and then again an arrow function with some curly brackets. And in there, we're going to use the Axios instance again to make the request. So we again do import the Axios instance. And then in the submission, we can say Axios instance, but this time we do .post because we want to post data instead of getting it. Now, the URL we want to go to is simply the URL of the active theme. So if we go here, we can just take this part and it will be fine. Because by doing post, it will recognize that we want to post data instead of getting something. Then we do a comma after this initial URL. And inside of the curly brackets, we need to state what data do we want to actually post. Now, what we want to populate inside of this model is actually the theme field, because that's the name that it expects. So we're going to go to the settings.jsx file, and in there we need to populate the theme column. So we say theme, and the value of that needs to be equal to value. So we just say value, because whenever we change something in our form, it's going to set the value to the option.id, which is the ID field of the options. And by specifying value, it will simply just have the ID. So that should potentially work. Now, after this, we might want to do some other actions. So I do .then, and then some double round brackets, and I say res for result. And then we do an arrow function like this. And we can do, for example, a console.log of res. And this is just going to log what the result actually is of us doing this. Now, similarly as before, we have created a constant, but we need to trigger it somehow. So to trigger this, we need a button and we need to connect it correctly. So the first thing in our return statement is I'm going to create some form tags. And then we're going to place our entire form of the settings between these form tags, like this. And whenever we do something to submit, so we do on submit, then we want to do the submission. So whenever this form thinks something is being submitted, we do this. Now, the way to trigger this on submit is by having a button. So in this case, what we can do is we can go to our friends from material UI, and then we can look for a component on the left-hand side called button. Now I just want to have a basic contained button. So if we expand that code, we can just take this button right here, and let's just place it below our form control. And then we call the label submit theme. And then what we also need to copy over is the actual import of that button. So we import the button on the top. Now, the only thing we need to do to make sure that our form knows that this is a submit button is we need to change the type, and we need to set that type to submit. And now it will know that this button is supposed to trigger this, which will trigger this, which will post our data. So hopefully that will work just fine, but let's check it out. And right now we're hitting an error. And the reason for that is that we're trying to map over different options, but actually the options have not really loaded yet. So that is a little bit of an issue at the moment. Now a very easy way to solve that is changing the empty thing right here to an empty list, like this. Because now by default it will just have an empty list and it will recognize that that is fine, because there's nothing. So now when we go back, we see this. Now a few things I want to change. I think this button is very close to this select form. So let's go to our settings.jsx, and in here we can do sx is and then some double squarely brackets. And I'm going to define a margin top, which is going to give us some spacing of 30 pixels. And I'm also going to set the width of my button, whether you like it or not, to 100% to make it a little bit more clear. And then it would, of course, help if I would be able to spell width. And there we go. Now we see the full width button. So let's see what happens if I now select a theme and we submit it. So I'm saying that we want to have the green theme as our active theme. And when I submit this, let's see what is now happening inside of our database. So we can go back to our Django admin portal. And when I go to my active themes, we actually get an error because I don't think I've defined it correctly. So let's go to our code and let's get rid of this return self.theme because it does not really like it. And when we now refresh this page, you can see that we have one item inside of our active theme table. So we have successfully created a theme. And we can see that the theme is equal to the green theme. So that is now working fine. Now, the issue is if we are going to add another theme and we pick it from here and we say light theme and I submit it, in here, if we refresh our active themes, you can see that we now have two. But I always want to have one, because if I have two, how do I know which one is going to be the active one? So let's just delete this thing right now. Let's delete object 2. And what we want to check for when we submit something is that if a theme is already existing inside of our application, then we want to update this theme. So we just want to change the value. But if there is no theme yet, we want to create. So the first thing we want to know is how many themes do we actually have inside of our active theme constant? Because we can simply say if that is 0, then create a theme, and if it is 1, then update the theme. So the first thing what I want to know is how many things are in active theme. So I can create a constant of active theme count, and I'm going to set that to active theme and then dot length, like this. And that should tell me how many active themes we are actually getting. Now the thing is, I want to get this count not over here, but in my settings.jsx file. So I'm going to be creating a new parameter and I'm going to call that counter. And then we can say in our app.jsx file that we are going to provide the active theme count to the settings page through the counter parameter. So we say counter equal to active theme count. And let's save that. And now what we should be able to do is go to our settings.jsx file, and I should be able to simply list down in a p tag how many counts we have. So I can say we have, and then counter active themes. And that should let me know how many active themes I have. So let's see that. Yeah, so you can see now we have one active themes. So that should tell us that we need to update it instead of creating it. So let's add some logic in our submission that we only create something when we have 0 themes. So let's now change our submission so that we can use the counter to determine if we need to create something or whether we need to update something. So we can do an if statement where we say if our counter is equal, and we do 3 to 0, then we want to do our submission as is. So then we do our axios.post and we do the same thing what I just showed you before. However, we will also have an else statement, and that else statement should actually update the data. So for now, we can just console.log, and I can say we need to update, not create. So let's see if this at least works so that we can then build the update logic. So we see that we now have one active theme, and let's see the logs to get the console.log. So if I now want to submit our green theme, we can actually see inside of our database here that we still have one object. So in my opinion, this is going fine. And now what we want to do is we actually want to update the value. So let's start by creating the backend logic for updating something. So we're going to go to our backend and then to our view. So next to the create statement, we need to make sure that we can actually update something. And we do that by doing a function for dev update. And this also takes self and request, but it also takes a PK or a primary key. And let's set that at the beginning to none. Now what this will do, it will take the primary key of the active theme. It will just update the value with the new value that we have provided. So what we can look for is our active theme, which is going to be equal to active theme.objects.get, because it can only be one. And there we want the PK to be equal to the PK. So we're going to look for the ID of the active theme and then update the theme field. So then we simply say that our serializer is again equal to the self.serializer class. And in there we provide two things. We provide the active theme so that we know what we need to update. And then we want to put in the data. So we say data is equal to request.data. Same as we did right here. Then we of course need to do the same checks. So we can, I think, copy over the statement that we have right here. We're going to be checking if this serializer is valid. If it is valid, then we save it and we return the data. If it is not valid, then we want to display the errors. So let's save this right now. And now we should be able to make a request to actually update. So that means back to our front end and back to our settings.jsx page. And now we say if the counter is equal to 0, then we can do the post thing. But if that is not the case, we're going to be replacing this part with actually updating it. And that is going to be the Axios instance, but we do .put because that is what updating means. Now, what we then need is a few things. First of all, we need to have the same string as we had before. But what we also need is the ID of the active theme that we want to update. However, we don't actually have that at the moment. So I'm going to be saying that this settings page also needs the my ID, which will be the ID of the active theme. And now we need to get that from our app.jsx file in some way to make sure that that is all working. And what we can actually also do is just pass in the entire active theme to our settings.jsx file. So we can set the useState at the end as same thing as for themes. And then I'm just going to pass in the entire active theme. So in the settings.jsx file, I'm going to change this to active theme. And then I'm going to make sure that we pass in the active theme through the active theme parameter. And let's make this the actual thing we have in here. So now we should have access to the full active theme. So let's just remove this console.log stuff from our JSX file. And let's also remove everything right there. And then let's see if in the settings.jsx file, I can do a console.log on our active theme and see what we get back. My active theme. Let's then also be a little bit cool. And let's save this. So in our front end again, and we inspect it, and let's see. Yeah, you see that my active theme has an array of 1 and then has the ID. So what we want to do is we want to pass in this ID when we update it. So what we can do, we want to do .put, but in that case, we actually need to specify the ID of where we want to put it. So to do that, we can do a $sign and then some squarely brackets and provide the ID. Now we get that by doing active theme, then a 0 and then .id. And you can also see that inside of here, when we go to the active theme, you can see that we first have a 0 and then it shows us the ID. So this should work just fine. Now again here we also need to do a comma and some squarely brackets and then define what the value needs to be. So it can be the same thing. We said that the theme is equal to the value. So active theme that we have right now has green theme as the value. So if I now go and select the dark theme and we do submit theme and we refresh this, it's been a while, and the reason that it did not update correctly is that we have a few issues with the code that I've written. Now, first of all, there were a few warnings inside of our console. So you can see right here that we have an out of range value for the select component. And the reason for that is that I did not change this thing inside of our app.jsx file, where we say that the default value is live theme for our theme, which is being passed as the value of our form. So I'm just going to change that to nothing because it doesn't actually accept that we have a value of light theme, because that doesn't really make any sense. So now when we go there, this thing should be disappearing if we refresh. And you can see that it's now no longer there. Then we also get a warning that each child in a list should have a unique key prop, and we can then go to our settings.jsx file and actually add a thing called key inside of the menu item. And we can also set that to option.id because that gives it a unique number. And then our code is happy again, because if I now refresh it, that should be gone. However, it still did not submit and I couldn't figure out why. But if we go to the settings.jsx file and we put in something called event in our submission, and in the top we do event.prevent default, I actually figured out what was going wrong. Because if I save this and I now try to update something, so I say I want to have a light theme and I submit, you can see that we get an actual error message, which goes a long way. And it says that we have an error here. And if I actually check the error inside of my backend, you can see that we need to have a trailing slash. So all we needed to do is have a slash on the end, similarly as here, but I forgot that. So let's save this. So now it should hopefully work. So when we go to our admin page, you can see that currently the value is set to dark theme. And now when I say I want to have light theme and we submit and we refresh here, you can see that it's being changed to light theme. So now the update works just fine. Now the final challenges that we will have is that we actually need to make sure that the active theme is reflected in the theme we see on the screen, because currently that is not the case. Now, to do that, we need to do a few things. One of the first things that we will do is create a new theme inside of our themes folder, and we're going to be calling this database theme. So let's rename it right here to database theme. And then we can also call this as the constant database theme. Now, what we want to do is we want to have this regular theme that we see right here, but then with a few parameters. So actually, we're going to be slightly changing the way that this looks, because after the database theme, we're going to do some round brackets and some squarely brackets, because we expect a few props that we need to pass in here. And then we can do an arrow function and create an actual function here where we return something. And the thing that we return is this create theme. So let's copy that over and put that here in our return statement and fix those indentations. Now, what you can see right here is that we still have the configurations hard-coded, such as dark, the main color, and the secondary color. But what I want is I want to have them as parameters, so I can put in the database data right there. So I'm going to be creating some parameters for mode, primary color, and then also for the secondary color. And I'm going to put them in the places where they belong. So mode is going to be equal to mode. Then the primary color is going to be here with primary color, and the secondary color is going to be there for the secondary color. So what we can then do in our app.jsx file is state that we want to use the database theme, but the things that are populated in here need to be the information from our database and not hard-coded. Last thing, what we need to do is make sure that the export default is database theme and not the old one, and let's save this. So now we need to go to our app.jsx file, and in there, let's import our database theme. So with that imported, we actually need to add some logic, which is going to be creating this database theme. So we can create a new constant, and let's call this my database theme. And in there, I want to have our database theme with the correct data from our active theme. So we can say that my database theme is equal to the database theme that we just created. And then we do some round and some squirrely brackets. And we're going to be making sure that the parameters are filled with our database data. So first of all, we have the mode. And then we also need to put in something for the primary color and for the secondary color. Now, how do we actually need to put this in? Well, to get that answer, let's first do a console.log the active theme and just comment this out for a minute, otherwise we will not see it. So if I inspect this page right here and go to the console, we only have the form counter. So let's quickly do a console.log for our active theme. And there we can see that inside of our theme, we have the theme details. And in the theme details, we can find the mode, the name, and the primary color and secondary color. So what we need to specify is a 0, then theme details, and then refer to mode, primary color, or secondary color, because this thing is nested. Now what that will look like inside of our constant is something like this. The mode will be equal to my active theme, because that's right here. But then I want to refer to the 0, similarly as what we also did with the ID, and that dot theme details dot mode. And we do the same thing for the primary color, but then we change mode to primary color. And we can copy over, because this is going to be exactly the same for the secondary color, but then we use the secondary color. And let's save this. Now, the tricky thing about this database theme is that it's going to throw an error if this active theme does not actually exist or it is not loaded yet. So we need to put some conditional logic in this constant to make sure that it is all fine. Because I believe if I now go back and I refresh this page, we will get an error because our theme has not loaded yet and it cannot read the properties of undefined. So a smart way to check whether we already have the data loaded is by checking if the length of the active theme is equal to 1, and we actually see data for one of these columns. So what we can do on the start is we can say active theme dot length, and then we do is equal to 1. And then we can also check if we actually have data for the theme details. So we can copy over and do an active theme 0.theme details. So we're checking whether that is actually existing. Then we want to have our database theme. And if that is not the case, then we display null. And let's save that. And now when we return to our front end, we actually see some data because it has realized that our active theme is now correctly loaded. So last step we now want to do is make sure that we pass in this database theme as the actual theme. Right now it is still light theme. Now one thing what I want to actually change is I want to get the light theme and set the value of our my database theme to the light theme in case that this thing has not been loaded yet. Because that way we will always have a theme even though these things are not in order. Then we can say that my database theme is going to be the new theme inside of our theme provider. And hopefully that will result in a nice looking page. And you can now indeed see that our active theme has been set inside of our front end. Because our active theme is the dark theme, and immediately you notice that the colors have changed to the dark theme. Now, when we change this and go to green theme and we click on submit, you will not immediately notice a difference. And the reason for that is that we need to refresh the screen. Because in our use effect statement, we only trigger it once the page is refreshed. Now, how do we then make sure that the user immediately sees the new changing page? Well, that's simply by reloading the page after we have submitted the data. So if we go to the settings.jsx file, we can put a statement in the .then that once we've submitted the data, we want to reload the page. So let's first do it for when we create a theme. And there we can then say that after we have submitted it, we want to do window.location.reload. And now I'm just going to copy over this then statement and also put that after our Axios instance.put, so that also when we update something, it should reload our page. And that should then trigger the new theme being applied to our page. So let's check it out. So now we can pick, let's say, the light theme and submit it. And you will see that immediately the light theme is showing up. And the same goes for when I now click to green theme, it will automatically be applied. So this works just fine. Now the only last thing that is annoying me is that we don't see the correct value after we have submitted the data. Because here it still shows pick a theme and it doesn't actually highlight the correct option here. So let's fix that as a last step. Now we should be able to do that from our app.jsx file, because in there we have the constant called theme and set theme, and that is the actual value of the form that we are seeing. So if we just move the logic for handling the form a little bit to the top of the page, then we can actually use set theme to populate the value of the theme form. So the constant of theme and set theme is now here, and by default it is empty. Now what we want to do is as soon as active theme has 1 as a total, then we want to set this theme with the default value. So what we can do is just copy over this use effect thing right here and paste it down there. And then we can say that we don't want to do get data, but we want to do an if statement. And we say if the active theme dot length is more than 0, then we want to do something. So we do some square brackets, and then we do set theme, and we make sure that it's equal to active theme, and then 0, and then dot theme, because that is going to get the ID of the actual theme and pass it into set theme. Now we only want to do this when active theme is changing, and that will only happen once we have reloaded the page. So we put in active theme right here. So it's going to check whenever active theme changes, then it's going to trigger this. And that will make sure that this works just fine. So let's now save this and make sure that we can see what is going on. So right now we are on green theme, but if I go to the dark theme and I submit, you can see that the theme is switching successfully and also the text right here. And the same goes if we go to the light theme and we submit, it immediately changes. So this seems to be working just fine. And that is all for this video. In this video, I showed you how we can store themes inside of our database and can switch based on the database values. In the next video, we're going to continue and I'm going to show you how users can create their own themes by using a color picker. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.